You gave it its best one ever! And now... I'm gonna...
I am the Mandarin!
I am Groot!
You didn't see that coming.
You're unbearably naive.
I'm sorry I didn't do none of it right. I'm damn lucky you, my boy.
Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships.
We'll never be.
During the time when Emma Frost led the Hellions, many of them ultimately ended up dead when caught in a battle with Trevor Fitzroy and his Sentinels. Emma herself ended up in a psychic coma, and issues later in issue 311 of X-Men when she awoke, she ended up swapping bodies with Iceman. So it's important to note that for pretty much all of this story arc, she does look like Iceman because she's in his body, so don't let that confuse you. Emma struggled with the revelation that the Hellions had been killed while in her care. Anytime Emma faces losing a student or child in her charge, it's pretty much the most sad in comics. Emma may be a lot of things, sometimes a hero, sometimes a villain, but the fact remains that she is a great teacher who very much cares for the children she looks after and trains. Number 9. Spider-Man Reign. Pretty much this entire limited series is depressing. I don't think I actually cried when reading it, but I definitely was severely bummed out by it. And if you haven't read it, be prepared to get bummed if you do. In Spider-Man Reign, we get to see a much older and much more senile Peter Parker. This version of him has less hope and is now retired from being Spider-Man. He works as a florist and struggles even to get that right, and he's lost MJ. And he kind of lost MJ as a result of his own involvement with her. I'm not gonna get into it because I don't think I can even say it on YouTube, but basically he's the reason that MJ died. Even when he tries to resurface to save the city from re-emerging villains and the police state that it has become, he struggles and gets his butt whooped a lot. And I mean a lot. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are enjoying this super sad list, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. The Origin of Somnus. This one is sad in kind of like a happy way. It's like, it just pulls on your heartstrings. In the Marvel Voices Pride issue, we got maybe one of the sweetest Akihiro aka Daken stories ever. Akihiro decides that there is someone who passed away recently, a mutant, who deserves a second shot at life in Krakoa, a second chance to truly be seen and be happy. That is Carl Valentino. Carl's mutant power allows him to control dreams, an oneromancer, meaning that Carl and Daken's one-night stand actually felt like a lifetime to Akihiro, a lifetime they spent together, and in the dream they were happy. It was a dream that Akihiro says he never knew he wanted, but it was too much for him inevitably at the time, so he ran. Carl lived out his life while Daken raged on for decades. Because of the period that Carl grew up in, he was unable to really reveal his true self, or to feel like he could reveal his true self to those around him, to let them know that he was gay. So while his life was happy, Akihiro felt Carl had never really gotten a chance to live truthfully as the person that he actually was. Because of this, Daken has him resurrected on Krakoa and is actually there when he wakes up, excited to let Valentino know that he has a second chance. Proud that he can finally be who he always wanted to be, who he always was, Carl takes the mutant name Somnus. Number 7. The Punisher finishes the job. Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe has to be up there for one of the saddest endings to a comic of all time. In this comic, Punisher sets out to get revenge on all superheroes after his family is killed as part of collateral damage in a superhero battle. He fights and kills everyone within the Marvel Universe until it's down to just him and Daredevil. Daredevil holds back from killing his friend Frank Castle, hoping he can manage to talk him down, but eventually he's also killed by Frank. However, as he lays bleeding to death, Daredevil takes the opportunity to unmask, revealing his true identity to Frank, revealing himself to actually be his friend, Matt Murdock. He tells Frank of the importance of remembering that even superheroes have other lives, like he does, or did, saying that there's always someone under the mask, Frank, but you killed us all, with his dying breath, making Frank realize that in order to finish the job, he must also take out himself, as he too is a man hiding behind a less literal mask. Number 6. Death of Grills. Grills died in the David Aja and Matt Fraction Hawkeye series from 2012. If you don't know who Grills is, you'd really need to read the series to get attached and feel the feels of his death, but to give you a brief synopsis of why his death hurt so bad, Grills is Hawkeye's well-meaning neighbor and later tenant. And if you've watched the Disney Plus Hawkeye series, he's not a LARPer in this reality anyways. He lives in in the same building as Hawkeye, aka Clint Barton, whom Grills always called Hawkeye. We get to know him as a friend of Clint's, whom he sometimes goes to for advice. He's kind, funny, and just an honest character. He also feels real, which is probably why it hurt so bad when he was killed by assassin and villain the Clown, who works for the Tracksuit Draculas, or did at the time in that series. Grills, no! Grills' death in the subsequent mourning of the character starts in issue number 10 and is felt onwards throughout Clint's narrative. Number 5. Death of Karen Page. I think Karen Page's death has to be one of the most tragic moments for Daredevil in the comics, and also for Karen, who, dies. It all went down in issue number 5 of the 1998 Daredevil series. Karen and Matt had both had a rough go, and were finally managing to get their lives back in order. Matt had just recovered from the Born Again story arc where Daredevil's secret identity as Matt Murdock is revealed to Kingpin, and his life ends up being destroyed by Fisk. Karen, on the other hand, had just recovered from a drug addiction and got over being falsely accused of murder, managing to break into the world of radio and become a talk show host. So it was really heartbreaking when, during a fight with Bullseye, Karen intercepted one of Daredevil's billy clubs that was taken by Bullseye and used as a weapon to target Matt. The blow by the billy club impaled Karen through her chest. Her dying words were to Matt as he cradled her in his arms, "I'll miss you." Oh, so sad. Poor Karen. Number 4. Destruction of Genosha. Probably one of the greatest tragedies to happen in the comics, especially in regards to the mutants, which I'm quite fond of. During the E is for Extinction story arc in New X-Men issue 115, we saw Genosha decimated. This previous mutant island nation had a population of over 16 million mutants, but when Cassandra Nova unleashed her wild sentinels on the place, it was easily overwhelmed and completely destroyed. All the mutants pretty much ended up dead, and even with resurrection protocols in place on Krakoa now, it will take some time before we can ever get the numbers close to what it was and bring back all those fallen mutants that were lost, including children and, whole families who were wiped out. It's actually the destruction of Genosha that brought out Emma's secondary mutation, her diamond form, making her one of the tragic, pretty much lone survivors of that attack, which we learn in the following issue. Poor Emma, jeez. Emma has had a rough time in the comics. Top 10 saddest things that happened to Emma Frost. Number 3. Disbanding of the Hellions. The 2020 Hellions series was such an interesting book. I fell in love with the idea of it when it was first announced, and we learned who our team would be, and then even more so when it was released and I began to read it. I also love how when that book was announced, everyone was like, I think pass. That sounds weird. And I was like, yay, Nanny! Give me Nanny and Orphan Maker. It quickly became one of my favorite X-books, and I fell in love with the characters and their relationships with one another. So you can imagine how hard it was when I finally read the ending to Hellions in issue 18, making me emotional just thinking about it. Especially as the team disbanded and almost everyone ended up with a somewhat depressing ending. But that's the thing with the Hellions team. They're all characters still trying to find their place, and just as they thought they had found it, it was taken from them. In a land that they have been told is one of opportunity, where there is a place for all of them. Each team member now finds themselves at the ending somewhat lost upon wrapping up this story. It made sense. It was well written and well drawn and well produced, but it still broke my heart. As with many well written comedic pieces, it also ended up being one of the most poignant endings in books I have ever read. Number 2. Death of Spider-Man. The death of Spider-Man in the Ultimate Spider-Man comic. This one may have not happened in the main continuity, but Ultimate Spider-Man would become such an influential comic that it would actually go on to inspire a lot of what we saw in the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film trilogy. Peter Parker here dies when he is just a teenager while fighting to save the people he loves. During a final fight with Norman Osborn's Green Goblin, Spider-Man seemingly kills him by bashing him with a truck a few times, but unfortunately that vehicle explodes. Having already been put through the ringer, this ends up being Spider-Man's final fatal injury and final moment, or so it would seem. Aunt May manages to rush to his side, with Peter just having enough time to tell her that he did it. He finally did it. While he might not have been able to save his Uncle Ben, this time he was at least able to save his Aunt May. Of course, it would be revealed later on that Peter managed to survive due to him basically being immortal, but at the time readers didn't know about that yet, so this death felt very final and very emotional. Number 1. Farewell from the X Factor team. One of the saddest moments for me me reading comics recently was the ending of the most recent X Factor series. And although the actual ending of that comic series was also bittersweet and brought a tear to my eyes, brought a few tears to my eyes, the most heart-wrenching part actually came from after the comic was finished with the farewell letters. The last few pages of that comic feature farewell letters from artist David Baldion and writer Leah Williams, and both made me cry profusely. Baldion talked about how hard it was to say goodbye to this book and to these characters, even more so than other book endings, which of course are always challenging. These were very much our kids, he writes. It very much felt like we were holding their hands during a journey of recovery, of acceptance, of rebirth. It's always hard. It was harder this time. And not only because we went deep with them, we could feel this story meant a lot to a lot of people out there. I'm going to miss my X Factor kids so much. I've come to know them so well that it honestly feels like some family member has left and is not around anymore. In saying her farewell, Williams shared what she felt the book and the whole world of Krakoa meant to the audience. Something became very clear to us all during the pandemic. The fact that as X-writers, we were helping by giving readers a safe place to escape to in the form of Krakoa. That became my greatest wish in writing X Factor during the pandemic and all the turmoil of the past year. I wanted to give you all a safe place to retreat. I wanted you all to feel welcome in Krakoa and know that you belong here. She continues, I wanted you to feel the community and camaraderie that I feel with my peers, and know that without a doubt, you belong. I wanted to keep the gates open for you as long as I could. And I think that made me so emotional because for me, that's what the X-Men is all about. It's like you don't belong, but like finding a home and a family where you feel like you belong. It's like everyone that doesn't belong finding that place where they can be safe. And so just that revelation of that being what the comic was about broke my heart. Oh, so good.
Number 10. His fiancée had a nervous breakdown. Barry Allen has had a few love interests in his lifetime, and Fiona Webb is a prominent one. They fall in love after Iris West, and Barry eventually asks Fiona to marry him. However, when their special day finally comes around, old Professor Zoom shows up and ruins everything. He almost succeeds in killing Fiona. When Barry is busy fighting Zoom as the Flash, he fails to show up at the altar in time, and Fiona thinks he's a runaway groom. The horror and stress of it all sends her over the edge and she has a breakdown. She winds up getting committed to the hospital as her mental state deteriorates, and it's made even worse when Barry decides to come visit. See, he uses his speed powers to bypass hospital security to visit her, and he doesn't show up on the hospital videotapes, so they think she's crazy when she mentions that the Flash came to visit her. She winds up smashing herself in the face with a picture of Barry and getting carted off on a stretcher, presumably to a padded room. And that's only number 10, folks. The Flash really has a rough time. Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you take a second and hit that like button. Number 9. He let crime run rampant in Central City. In 1987, DC released The Flash issue number 200, in which Wally has his secret identity revealed. He's pretty upset with the public's newfound knowledge of him because he knows the considerable danger this poses to his friends and his loved ones. He winds up taking an offer from Spectre to wipe the general public's memory of the Flash, including his own. In the final pages of this comic, we see the full ramifications of this decision. Wally and everyone else has completely forgotten the identity of the Flash, or whatever happened to him. This comic even explicitly states that the loss of the Flash caused a significant increase in the crime rates in Central City. Countless people suffer and possibly die without a hero patrolling the streets. It's a pretty grim look at things, but perhaps Wally regains his memory later in time? I don't really want to ruin anything for you guys. Let's keep on rolling. Number 8. His brother became a supervillain. Surely almost everybody knows Barry Allen, but there is another, Malcolm Allen. Barry has a secret twin brother who he originally thought died in birth. However, when these two come face to face, it was far from a happy reunion. Malcolm was secretly given to a family of abusive con artists with superpowers, and they constantly taunted him for being inferior while they raised him. Man, that is really messed up. Like, why would you adopt a kid and then just give him a hard time for not being good enough? Like, this is the kid that you picked. Anyway, by the time Malcolm tracks down Barry, he's pretty angry and envious of Barry's life, as you can imagine, and so he vows to kill Barry and everything he holds dear. His adoptive grandmother teaches him how to use the family superpowers, and so he reinvents himself as the supervillain Cobalt Blue. It's not the Flash's fault or anything, it's just another of the many hard knocks the Flash suffers throughout his life. Psychotic vengeful brother? Check. Number 7. forced to fight his own grandson. How about psychotic vengeful grandson from the future? Also check. During the crossover called Blackest Night, the villain Necron reanimated dead DC characters with some black power rings and created a zombie army of Black Lanterns. Bart Allen is Barry's grandson, who recently died and was resurrected. Barry has temporarily become a Blue Lantern during this event, and he has to face off against his evil grandson. When the two do battle in a graveyard, Bart shows his resentment as he cruelly taunts Barry while the two of them fight. Barry tries to remove the black ring, but is interrupted by an undead version of Reverse Flash. Barry manages to connect with the living Bart beneath the surface by contacting him inside the Speed Force, and they have a really wholesome reunion. Barry owns up to his neglect as he guides Bart through the process of breaking free from the control of the ring. It's a really heartwarming moment. Number 6. Attacked by his future self. Now what if Barry did battle against a psychotic vengeful version of himself? This has also happened, and just another great example of the many struggles of the Flash. Not only does he deal with some super heavy duty villains and storylines, but being a speedster, he's also constantly battling against the past and the future half of the time. In this storyline, we're introduced to a whole new future Barry. After a devastating accident that basically ruins his life, we meet future Barry. It's 20 years into the future, in fact. He's become really hardcore and a little bit unstable. We even see him throw a dude off of a roof and leave one villain to die after a fight. Worse, he discovers a rip in the Speed Force and decides the only way to set it right is to kill his younger self to repair the rip. He drags our Barry from his home and proceeds to beat him to death outside of the city. The young Barry doesn't even stand a chance against his older counterpart, who has been trained by the best in the DC universe. Just when the future Barry is about to break his neck, a future version of Wally West shows up and saves him. With the rip in the Speed Force getting worse, Wally winds up sacrificing himself in the end, and future Barry is left alone, having lost his nephew and sort of become evil. Number 5. He became the Black Flash. The Black Flash is the representation of death for anyone connected to the Speed Force. Once the Black Flash catches up with the Speedster, they immediately die. It's like regular death, except it catches up with you a lot faster. When Barry Allen is chasing down the evil Speedster Savitar, he reaches out to grab him, and to his surprise, the villain crumbles to dust the moment he is touched. Later, another Speedster is turned to dust by Barry's touch, and he realizes he is to blame. Something is wrong with him. He and Wally later on discover that he's been turned into the Black Flash. As his mind and body are slowly taken over by the Black Flash entity, he does the only thing he can. He runs back to the Speed Force, where he was once trapped for years. Even Superman tries to get him to stop, but he fails, and Barry sacrifices himself to save everyone. Again. Number 4. He had to break out of prison. In The Flash number 164, we got to see the Flash kind of go buck wild in a prison and kick the snot out of some guards. It's not the usual scene for a superhero, but it was pretty neat. What's really wild is, we later learn that the guards are actually only trying to imprison the Flash because he is in a mirror dimension where he doesn't actually exist. In this world, anyone with superpowers is evil, so they obviously don't trust old Wally West. The thing that's wild about this is, Wally could have maybe tried to explain himself. I know the guards likely would have been having none of his crap and would have laid the beat down anyways, but isn't being a hero kind of about asking questions first and butt kicking second? I guess it depends on which superhero you ask. Anyways, whether you find it justifiable or not, Wally really puts the hurt on a whole bunch of guards in this comic, and I suspect he could have escaped without causing quite so much collateral damage. Number 3. He is sued for letting a woman burn. This one comes from 1989 in The Flash number 89. This story is focused around the limitations of the Flash's speed-based abilities. The Flash is actually in court in this issue, being sued for negligence in the case of a woman who tragically lost her legs in a building fire. Initially, readers are made to sympathize with the Flash because it's presumed that he just didn't see her or something. However, Flash later reveals that he feels like he did have enough time to look for her, and by focusing on other things, he left an innocent woman in a situation where she likely would have died. It's a pretty unique story where we see the weight and responsibility of a superhero's day-to-day decisions, and we also bear witness to the potential for tragedy that lies in every choice a superhero makes. Number 2. He messed with the space-time continuum. Dude, If there's any one takeaway from all this Speedster stuff, not to mention decades of movies and stories about time travel, it's that you never mess with the time-space continuum. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but the one thing we all understand is you're not supposed to mess with it. In part 1 of this video, we mentioned how Barry's mother was murdered and his father was framed for it. Well, Barry Allen once tried to go back in time and save his mother, and it caused the entire Flashpoint event. It was an act with obviously good intentions, but man, the implications were seriously unsustainable. You think Barry would understand the potential for catastrophe in this kind of time traveling nonsense, but he just gives it the old college try anyways. As you can imagine, it doesn't really work out the way Flash wanted in the end. Number 1. Trapped Zoom in his worst memory. Leading up to The Flash number 200, published in 2003, Wally had been in battle against the insane speedster Zoom for the past few issues. Enlisting every speedster who would join, Wally borrowed their speed to aid him in his fight against Zoom. Despite this incredible newfound power, it's all Wally can do to keep up with Zoom as the two of them fight. In the midst of the battle, Zoom attacks Linda, Wally's wife at the time, releasing a sonic boom that injures her and ends the lives of babies in her womb. As you can imagine, Wally is really overcome with emotion because of this, and he gets a boost of rage and finally catches Zoom and finishes the battle. In the heat of the moment, he basically forces the villain through a rift in time, trapping him in an endless loop in a moment from the past. We see Zoom later trapped in a tube, endlessly reliving the worst moment of his life. Number 10. He became the fattest man on Earth. This bizarre storyline is from 1960, and in it, the evil Gorilla Grodd has transferred his consciousness into human form to confront the Flash. He shoots Flash with a radiation gun that causes his body to absorb excess moisture from the air, making Barry swell up like a water balloon to an alarming and uncomfortable looking size. Not only that, Grodd also erases his memories and sells him to a heartless sideshow owner who puts Barry on display and charges people to come and see the fattest man alive. I can only imagine how cringy it would be to try and read this story today and take it seriously. We get to see a deeply depressed Barry, exploited, embarrassed, and dejected, with little kids pointing and laughing at him. Thankfully, he does eventually recover his memory and his figure. Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see more, be sure to take a second and hit that like button. Number 9. His face was disfigured. Not everything on this list is cosmetic, but we'll get into the more emotional suffering later. For now, let's talk about the time Big Sur punched the Flash's lights out. Big Sur is one of the Flash's lesser known villains, but he has some super strength and lands a clean, super powered blow right in Barry's face, and the signature Speedster passes out in the bushes at the park. Two kids happen across his body and recoil in horror when they take a peek under his mask. His face is so smashed up it's barely even recognizable. His teeth are chipped, his eyes swollen shut, it's brutal. Seriously hurt, he heads to Gorilla City and gets patched up by his friend Solivar, leader of the super intelligent gorilla race. They heal him up and rebuild his face differently to help keep his identity secret. Luckily, they go with the usual 2 eyes, 1 nose, regular looking face. In the future, advanced surgery helps Flash eventually return to the face that we know and love. Number 8. Almost burned to death. In the Flashpoint universe, Barry doesn't have his superpowers, so he works together with Thomas Wayne, that reality's version of Batman, to come up with a scheme to try to get his powers back, so that he can run back in time and fix the timeline. So the plan is simple: recreate the events that originally gave him his powers, by covering himself in chemicals and then getting struck by lightning. Thomas, for good reason, has a lot of concerns, but Barry races ahead with the plan, and it doesn't go well. He is struck by lightning, but instead of receiving powers, he almost roasts to death, getting 3rd-degree burns all over his body. Thomas bandages up what's left of Barry's skin while he screams in agony, and we see Barry lying on a gurney, soaked in blood and covered head to toe in bandages. It is a bit of a gruesome scene and definitely inspires some sympathy for the Flash. Number 7. Captured and tortured. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, a lot of things got really cranked up. Many heroes were pushed to their limits, and good old Barry is no exception. The Flash gets captured by the Anti-Monitor, and then mentally tortured by the evil Psycho Pirate, who has the ability to manipulate emotions. Barry endures this for weeks, with Psycho Pirate forcing him to relive his worst memories and emotions over and over again. We see poor Barry cowering in the dark, terrified for his life, forced to watch as his fellow Justice League member Red Tornado is killed right before his eyes. When he finally breaks free, he's been through so much emotional turmoil, he goes buck wild with rage and beats on Psycho Pirate until he begs for mercy. Definitely a low point for the Flash. Number 6. His wife Iris West was killed by Zoom. Since the first appearance of Barry Allen in 1956, he's been paired up with Iris West, another DC power couple like Lois and Clark. They've been married and had all kinds of relationship drama. While she's attending a costume party dressed as Batgirl, Zoom waits for her in the kitchen, and when she comes to get a drink, he kills her. Using his speed powers to vibrate his hand at turbo speed, he passes his hand through her skull and does fatal damage to the molecules inside her brain. This causes instantaneous death, and the tragedy of it all is devastating for Barry. Later in the story, his true love is brought back to him through some time travel stuff and reincarnation, but it's still a seriously heart-wrenching moment for the Flash. Number 5. He killed a man. After the death of his first wife, Barry eventually met and fell in love with Fiona Webb, and the two dated on and off. She worked for a senator named Creed Phillips on his election campaign. When Creed is revealed to secretly be the villain Eradicator and later dies, Fiona and Barry realize through the whole ordeal that they really do love each other and decide that they're gonna get married. On the day of the wedding, the Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom, shows up again and attacks Barry. The two race across the city fighting each other, but when Zoom switches his focus to Barry's fiancée, Flash goes into a rage and he runs up and grabs him by the neck from behind. Unfortunately, the sheer force of this alone snaps the villain's neck and kills him, and Barry is racked with guilt over having killed someone. The city even has him stand trial, and his longtime friend Wally testifies against him, saying Flash should have done more to stop Zoom without killing him. It's a real low point for Barry, and he's forced to flee to another time period. Number 4. His nephew Wally died. If suffering all this physical and emotional pain wasn't bad enough, Barry has also seen the death of his beloved nephew Wally West. Wally and his aunt are driving, racing to stop Iris's brother from killing the Flash. They end up getting in a car crash on the way, and not wearing seatbelts, the results of the crash are pretty brutal. Iris is left permanently paralyzed and Wally is thrown from the vehicle. Barry arrives to see Wally's lifeless body on the road and Iris being loaded into an ambulance. Flash blames himself for not being able to stop the accident, and the death of Wally sends him into a dark period of sadness and guilt. Number 3. Parents dead. Things weren't always this way. Maybe it was the success of Superman or Batman stories, but either way, when DC rewrote the Flash's backstory in Rebirth, they gave him the old cliche tragic past. In this new version of his history, his mother Nora is brutally murdered when he's a child. Not only that, his father is wrongfully sent to prison for the crime. And if that wasn't bad enough, his father dies in prison before he can be proved innocent, and the Flash goes through it all alone. It's only later in life that he learns it was the Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom, that murdered Nora and framed his father Henry for the crime to ruin Barry's life. Ironically, the plan backfires, and these events lead to Barry becoming a forensic scientist for the police, and then later becoming the hero known as the Flash. Number 2. Returns to the past and allows his mother's death. Alright, we've seen a lot of stuff. How could it possibly be worse? Well, one time, Barry woke up in an alternate reality where his mother is still alive. In the Flashpoint universe, his mother is alive and his father was never framed for murder. It sounds great and Barry gets a nice touching reunion, but there's actually a bunch of other stuff in this universe that's different too. Like Bruce Wayne was killed instead of his parents. On top of that, in this universe, Wonder Woman and Aquaman have basically caused a huge war in Europe, causing massive destruction and devastation. Barry decides he needs to reset the timeline, even though it means losing his mother again. Barry does do the heroic thing in the end, and sacrifices his own happiness to put everything back to normal. Number 1. Sacrificed himself to save the multiverse. In the crossover event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Barry makes the ultimate sacrifice, his own life. The Anti-Monitor has constructed a giant antimatter cannon to destroy the various Earths, and Barry does what he has to do to stop it. He runs against the antimatter to destroy the weapon, running so fast he's going back through time, reliving his memories as his body disintegrates. The pain becomes so intense at one point that he cries out for help with nobody to hear him. He reminds himself that there is always hope, and he keeps pushing even as his body is breaking down completely. He leaves us with a final message. that we must save the world, and Barry Allen dies a hero. This version of him anyways.
Kicking off the list with number 10, What If? The Juggernaut. Okay, to start this sad list, we got What If starring the Juggernaut. It was released in 1997, written by George Gonzalez, and we kick off in a world where Sentinels have already wiped out all superheroes. Great start. Plus there's this toxic gas that's filling up the atmosphere, which will kill all of life. So things are beginning grim right off the bat, okay. And all that's left now at this point is just the Juggernaut. Now he's hunting down these Sentinels. He wants to die, but his own invulnerability won't let that happen. Kind of like Hulk the End, just a sad, strong man in a world full of rubble. So he sees Iron Man's helmet, he sees Cyclops' cracked visor. He's just walking down horrible memory lane. Then he meets a couple of surviving mutants and they're not in good condition, mentally. I mean, they're actually blaming Juggernaut for killing the X-Men. And it all ends with Juggernaut knowing he's going to be the last living being on the planet and that it's his own damn fault. Number 9, what if Cable had destroyed the X-Men? Well, this one just sounds bad right off the hop. So after Professor X came back to Earth, the team was never going to be the same again. At this X-Men meeting, Xavier gets in a fight with Cable, and then all of a sudden it turns into Cable and his crew versus everybody, and it was just this big brawl. Now they escape, but later on, Cable kills Xavier, Jean, and Scott with a siren bomb. So now everybody's deciding on what to do with this guy. Wolverine's team wanted to kill him, and Storm's team wanted to bring him in. Both are pretty bad. So the Avengers have to step in and fight their battles while they're all working their own stuff out over there. So the Avengers are like, just do your thing, we're gonna go fight your bad guys, just wrap it up. But eventually Cable and his team is killed by Wolverine's team. Number 8, what if Wolverine battled Conan the Barbarian? Written by Glenn Herdling and released in 1990, what if Wolverine had battled Conan the Barbarian? So basically Conan and Wolverine switch dimensions. So we have Wolverine causing trouble in the Hyborian Age alongside Red Sonja, and Conan smashes Cyclops in the head with a rock, which causes the full fury of the Phoenix Force to be unleashed. So now this has caused a ripple effect, so the psychic rapport was shattered, and without Wolverine to hurl Colossus at her, there's nothing that prevents Jean Grey from transforming into her dark persona before she can destroy herself, resulting in the destruction of the entire universe. So just like that, Cyclops gets hit with a rock and then it all goes to shit. So yeah, crossovers are for sure fun, but you gotta look at the possible ways it could go poorly as well. Wolverine versus Conan the Barbarian is definitely one of those ways. Number 7, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? In this reality, Professor X is the one who becomes Juggernaut and gets buried. Now this causes him to go down a completely different path when it comes down to the X-Men, because after this, he never ended up creating the X-Men because he was stuck. So now the Fantastic Four wants to defeat Magneto instead. So Professor X, he's still listening. He's using his mind powers. He's knowing what's going on out there. He's kind of getting pissed that he's not able to go out and help. So he digs his way out, and his telepathy powers are now stronger than ever with his new Juggernaut super strength. So he takes over the country with his own X-Men posse to enforce these anti-human laws. So Cyclops even sided with Magneto at this point because he could block Xavier's telepathy. So they're battling it out on Asteroid M, and Cyclops is trying to remind Xavier about his original dream, you know, with humans and mutants living together in harmony. And before he could really consider it, the ground beneath him exploded and he got launched into space, probably forever. And man, that's gotta be boring. Imagine not dying in space. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. This should be number 1 maybe, I don't know. Number 6, what if the Hulk died and Kyra lived? Written by Greg Pak, released in 2007. Okay, so we start with the Hulk saving Kyra by throwing her out of the way of the explosion instead of the ship. So now the Hulk had died along with Crown City. And Kyra, she's pretty pissed, right? She takes all the old power from the planet and gets ready with her sights set on Earth. She's coming. First stop, of course, being the moon, where she defeats Black Bolt and then implants a obedience disc on him. So when Strange and Sentry come to the rescue, she makes Black Bolt use his sonic scream, which of course results in both of them dying. She's killing everybody fast, okay? So Heroim comes to stop her and says that basically if you kill everybody on Earth, nobody can honor your dead husband. So she says, fine, but you're gonna wish you were dead instead. And then it cuts to 21 years later, and she's made all the remaining heroes build this massive Hulk statue. And when it's finally done, she walks onto the hand of the statue and then turns into stone, joining him. The end. Yeah, how sad is that? I mean, I feel like it wouldn't take those guys 21 years to build a statue. I mean, if they're getting paid by the hour, sure, then by all means, go for it. Number 5, what if the Avengers had never been? Written by Jim Shooter and Gil Kane, released in 1977. This was actually the first what if issue with a major death. So of course it has to be on the list somewhere. So we start off with the Hulk. Now this time he's not hitting, he's actually quitting. Now this caused the Avengers to dismantle, so Stark asked Rick Jones to find the Hulk, Thor went back to Asgard, and Jan and Hank went back to living as normal people. So Rick finds him, but he's now being held hostage from the Green Giant. So Stark swoops in and saves him, and they head back to the Avengers mansion. So Namor and the Hulk call out the Avengers, or rather what's left of them. So Iron Man makes a few iron suits for the others, and the suits, I mean, they aren't Tony Stark. They can't control these things nearly as well as he can. Unless you're in the movie Iron Man 3, then everyone can do that all of a sudden. So they stay in retirement. They're like, screw that, I don't want any part of that. So he's like, whatever. He powers up his own suit a little bit too much, and then he heads to the battle alone. He fights a bit, and then right when he's about to be ended, the rest show up. Jan, Hank, and Rick are back. Nice. So Tony is done at this point. His armor is weak, he's close to being finished off, so he uses his remaining power to regenerate Hank's armor. So the Hulk snaps out of it and goes after Namor, while the rest of our heroes mourn over a fallen Tony Stark, who sacrificed himself to save his team. Similar vibes to Endgame. A lot of feels in that one, okay? A lot of feels. A good number 5 feels train. Number 4, what if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glut, released in 1977, we get to see a dream play out. Look, we've all probably wanted to be Spider-Man at one point or another. Of course, I mean, doing backflips and swinging downtown, that's gotta be the vibe. But of course, when it comes to stopping criminals and taking out supervillains, it's probably pretty stressful. So in this what if, we get to see this idea play out. We see other characters have a crack at the life of the web slinger, starting with Flash Thompson. And let's just say it's a lot harder than it looks. So we got Flash Thompson. Now after he gets bit, he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and he feels pretty good with his new given abilities, and he plays it out a bit. So he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling, maybe make some cash, which is a pretty good idea. I mean, you're a superhero, so you can definitely win most, if not all, fights. But he accidentally kills the guy. Sorry, oops. Then Betty Brant is now up with the powers. Okay, so let's see how she would do in the life. Well, her costume for starters is pretty badass. But when she runs out of web fluid while making TikToks, a thief runs by and gets away. And that thief, of course, being the one to take Uncle Ben's life. So far, so bad. Now finally, we have our third contender with the powers. John Jameson. While his outfit was also pretty good, he couldn't do the job like Peter, and he actually died while trying to prevent a space shuttle from crashing. I guess it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, to be fair, if something actually happened and it had webs, I really wouldn't know what to do. I would do a backflip and be like, is it fixed? No? It was cool though. Number 3. What if the Punisher killed Daredevil? We all know the Punisher as the guy who usually brutally kills criminals. See, with superheroes, those guys he likes to hit with a tranquilizer. But in this what if, we see Daredevil get hit with one of those tranq darts and fall off a building. So while Kingpin prepared for his next step now that he's out of the way, Spider-Man stepped in to deliver some justice on Frank Castle. So he finds the Punisher, and Punisher has no tranq darts left. So he shoots Spider-Man in the shoulder. It's messy, but not fatal, he says. He should survive unless he exerts himself, which he does. And his identity is then revealed. Then it cuts to Aunt May's house, and she grabs a paper, reads the shocking headline, and then the house explodes from a missile launched from the Silvermane City. Boom, house gone. And then after a little while, Peter shows up in a hospital gown, ready to get some revenge on Frank. Peter does pretty well in the fight, so well he's actually just moments away from throwing the Punisher off of a building to his death. But the Punisher stalls and says he has info about his Aunt May, and this slows Peter down for just a split second, allowing for the Punisher to unload on Peter. God, imagine if they introduced Frank Castle in the MCU and then they immediately did something like this. Number 2, what if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Released in 1990, written by Richard Howell. Yeah, judging by this title alone, this one's a little sad. I figured we're already on the Spider-Man misfortune train, so I had to throw this one in next, you know? What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete patrolling the streets when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven in a net, and just like that, he unloads, killing Peter Parker. And of course, he eats a bunch of spiders and suits up himself to celebrate. Yeah, you eat a bunch of spiders, now you're Spider-Man. That's how it works. I think a human eats like, what, 7 spiders in a year when they're sleeping? So we have like, what, 7,000 to go? So now he's Spider-Man, just like that, cool. Meanwhile, MJ is like, where on earth is that Peter Parker guy? And then MJ is approached by a couple of thugs, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Only it's Kraven, but she doesn't know that. But she can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't recognize her, and he's way more brutal with taking out these thugs. So Cap, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what's up with the wall crawler. They did a decent job of wearing down the beast, but he needed more power. He ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? Comics are weird. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker, and that the Spider-Man is indeed not the same. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing about the news. She's messed up now for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public. The story ends with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter just can't catch a break, eh? Oh my God. And finally, number 1, the saddest of them all, What If Wolverine Father. Written by Rob Williams, released in 2011, we start off with Wolverine taking out the Winter Soldier. And we see a world with Wolverine and Daken if they had spent their life growing together as father and son. So now we get to see what it would have been like if Logan was there for them the whole time. Now in this reality, they're named John. This life, however, was filled with repression and lies and led to John leaving his home and rising up as Daken, becoming the leader of the Japanese underworld. So Wolverine tried to save him, but because of the way he was raised with this version of Logan, he looked at him like a monster. He viewed himself as a monster too. This is the Muramasa blade, John, says Logan as he stabs him. Healing factors don't work on it. The issue ends with the boy dying beside his father, and Logan uses the same blade on himself. And that's the end. That's the end of the comic. Everyone dies, everyone's sad. That's What Ifs for you, right there. Number 10, he created Carnage. With Venom, Let There Be Carnage releasing later on this year, we finally get to see Carnage on the big screen with Woody Harrelson set to play the mad Cletus Cassidy. So why not kick this list off with one of Venom's biggest mistakes? Creating Carnage. When Eddie Brock was doing time at Rikers Island, his cellmate was none other than Cletus Cassidy, who was in there for horrible crimes. So when Venom came to break Eddie out of jail and reunite, part of the symbiote was left behind, and it ended up bonding with Cletus Cassidy. That plus the symbiote equals, well, Carnage. Absolutely. And we meet Carnage for the first time in comics with Amazing Spider-Man issue 361. In a list of sad moments in Venom's life, I think creating your archenemy is worth a mention. After all, his name may pop up again on this list, but that's for later. And before we continue on with some sad Venom moments, guys, if you could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up just to boost some morale. It's a sad video. We could use some thumbs up, brighten the mood a little bit. And if you haven't already subscribed, now would be a good time to do so as well. Just a little click, and then we're happy. That's it. It does wonders for the channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to some sad Venom times. Number 9, too many webs, too little time. It takes time getting used to your superpowers. I mean, to figure out the do's and the don'ts. Look at Scarlet Witch or the Hulk even, for example. Even having years of experience, things can still go south. In the comics, it doesn't take long for Venom to figure out webs are not unlimited. In the fabulous 300th issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, we see Venom's first swing at the spider life. He bonded with Spider-Man first, so when MJ meets the symbiote for the first time, she actually thinks that it's still Peter in his new black suit. He's similar to Spider-Man, only his webbing comes from his own symbiotic material. So when he shoots out the webs, he's really just shooting out himself. And eventually, he starts to run out of himself. He ends up falling to the ground, ending his first conflict with Spider-Man in a rather depressing way. Now, this isn't a video game, Eddie, so webbing is limited this time around. Number 8, clapped by the Hulk. When it comes to taking down the crazy Clintar, you can usually rely on fire to help settle the score, or its other main weakness, sound. Now, at the end of the movie Spider-Man 3, we saw Peter Parker figure this out. It matched the comics a lot with the bell tower, the symbiote being torn off Eddie Brock, all that jazz. But in Peter David's The Incredible Hulk vs. Venom, we see Hulk dish out a thunderous clap, so loud that Venom gets knocked right out. He gets clapped so hard that he throws up, which is pretty wild to me, considering just 4 pages before, he took an undercut of a lifetime from the Hulk, yet that sound weakness is just too much to bear. Somebody tell Venom to never see a Slipknot concert ever. The guy wouldn't even make it past the openers. Number 7, snarky Tony Stark. In Iron Man issue 302, readers got to see a venomous blowout. Well, sort of. See, this is the time in the comics where Venom started to switch over to the good side. He started to become a part-time hero. This is after his truce with Spider-Man was made in Amazing Spider-Man 375. So he's going toe-to-toe with Stark now because, well, he doesn't like his company, he doesn't agree with how he runs things, the whole shebang. They're fighting, Stark switches over to ultrasound imaging because, you know, there was goop all over his mask and you couldn't see. But the ultrasound imaging was, of course, harmful to Venom. They just weren't a fan. So as you're reading this, you would think, okay, this is how he stops him. Some cool tech, checks out. Wrong. See, Stark actually roasts Venom so hard that he stops fighting. He insults him. He makes him feel so bad with his words. He straight up shames him. He's like, oh, you want to confront evil? Well, how about you take a good look in the mirror, pal? 6, unfortunate Fortunato. Losing a battle is all part of the fun as well. So Venom got shamed so hard that he backed into a cave, When you're defeated, you gotta come up with a new plan. It's part of the gig. But sometimes when Venom loses these battles with Spider-Man, he doesn't take it very well. Like Angelo Fortunato. Back in 2005, Marvel wanted to reboot Venom, so the new Venom host was Don Fortunato. And in his story, he won the symbiote in an auction. He gave the suit to his son Angelo in attempts to toughen him up. I mean, sure, paintball would have sufficed, but sure, super suit it is. Eddie warned Angelo about the risks of doing this, but Angelo didn't listen. He ignored Eddie and then attacked Spider-Man anyways. He fought him, he ripped out Spider-Man's heart, and then he realized it's not actually Spider-Man. Rather, it was an imposter all along. So you would think that would be the end of it. That's pretty harsh enough. That could probably be a list point by itself. But when the real Spider-Man came in, Angelo didn't stand a chance. He was getting whooped. He was getting whooped so hard that he left. He just ran away from the problem. And maybe Eddie was right. Okay, fair. But Venom wasn't a fan of this idea. The whole running away from a fight thing didn't sit well with him. So he abandoned his host mid-air. No, he didn't order him an Uber. He didn't drop him off at a Burger King. He was like, yeet now, bye, see ya. Spider-Man would have saved him, but his gear wasn't working properly after the fight that Angelo had just caused. You played yourself. Number 5, the Savage Six. The Crime Master has been a Spider-Man villain since The Amazing Spider-Man issue 11, and in 2012 he gathered his own team of villains called the Savage Six. It consisted of Death Adder, the Human Fly, Jack-o'-lantern, Megatack, and Toxin. Now, Crime Master forcefully bonded Eddie with the Toxin symbiote, and then the team targeted all those that Venom cared about. And then in the very next issue, they go after Betty Brant, with Jack-o'-lantern first up to bat. Next, the team sets their sights on Betty's family. The Human Fly was actually seconds away from eating Betty's mother. It's horrible. And then in part 4, it's revealed that the Crime Master was actually Betty Brant's brother, and Betty was forced to deal with him the hard way. Poor Eddie, and also poor Betty. Poor Eddie and Betty. This is a lose-lose for both parties involved. Number 4, bonding with Anne Wang. Anne first met Eddie Brock at Empire State University. She made her comic debut back in Amazing Spider-Man 375. She's a wonderful lady. She reflects on how once upon a time, her and Eddie were in love because, well, he was smart, witty, and he had a boyish charm that swept her off her feet. Sounds magical. But we're in a list of sad Venom moments, so it's about to change. Sorry. While they were married, Eddie became a journalist for the Daily Globe. Now, this happened while she was a lawyer. After she divorced him, which is fine because sometimes things don't work out, things only got worse for her. She was shot by the villain Sin Eater, so Eddie figured it was a good idea to loan her some of the symbiote stuff, to help heal her. Now, it worked, but the only downside is now we have another Venom. It's not that easy. You can't just put some goop on someone, heal them up, and then bring it back without consequences. So now we have another Venom. Now we have She-Venom. Anne ended up taking the lives of 2 men who attacked her, so although the symbiote returned to Eddie, she still has to live with all those memories during that time. And she was traumatized until the end of her life. She couldn't even leave her own apartment. That's how bad it was. Even for such a short amount of time, Venom can cause quite the stress. Number 3, tortured by Carnage. So remember that Carnage guy that I mentioned at the beginning of this list? Well, in Web of Spider-Man issue 103, which is part of the Maximum Carnage storyline, Cletus Cassidy straight up tortures Venom. He chains him up over top of a fire, which we know doesn't mix too well with symbiotes, and he also shot at him with a sonic gun. So that's 2 weaknesses right there, boom. It's not looking good. Now, it's one thing to be attacked by your greatest enemy, but when they know your weak points because you are the reason they exist, that's a whole new level of pain. It's painful and personal. Carnage is just the worst. Number 2, he was fired. Perhaps one of the most saddest moments is when Eddie and the symbiote first met. And it happened to be on one of the worst days of Eddie's life. He had just been fired by J. Jonah Jameson for making Spider-Man out to look like a thief. So with his journalism career now over, he goes to Our Lady of Saints Church, asks for forgiveness, and while he was there at his arguably lowest moment in life, that's when Venom just had to come along. To think that all this started because of a mistake that Eddie made with his job is just arguably the most sad point of all of them. The hatred for Peter plus the symbiote's hatred for Spider-Man, I mean, this was the world's best timing. A match made in heaven. Or a church, rather. Close enough. And number 1, his childhood. What's a villain without a sad origin story? Before the symbiote even came in contact with Eddie, his sad days were already well upon him. He grew up without a mother. She sadly didn't survive when she had Eddie, and his father, Carl Brock, resented Eddie for this, which is awful. What a terrible way to grow up. Nobody should have to experience that, let alone feel guilt for that afterwards as well. That's horrible. But Eddie was doing great in school. He was actually really trying to earn his father's love growing up. And in order to make friends, Eddie would often find things that were lost. So he would steal things and then return them just to make a friend. That's how bad this guy's life was. Poor Eddie. And then when he was a teenager, his bad luck grew immensely. He took his father's car and snuck out for a night in the town. And when he was on his way home, he accidentally hit his neighbor's son. Now his father ordered him to plead innocence, although Eddie's guilt was at an all-time high. He ended up pleading not guilty, but in doing so, it bankrupted his father and it ruined his reputation at the same time. That on top of Eddie's already horrible childhood, I can't imagine. This is a terrible origin story. No wonder the symbiote consumed him. Poor kid.
Number 10, thought he killed a friend. During New 52 in issue 1 of the 2011 series of The Flash, Barry Allen is on a date when he witnesses a robbery. He manages to chase after the thieves and get his hands on the device that they were stealing, but during the fight, one of them is killed. Later, we learn that the thief who died was someone he knew, Manuel Lego, a friend of his from school. Barry Allen suddenly feels sick to his stomach, believing that when he, as the Flash, tossed the culprit through a plate glass window, the impact had killed him. After further investigation, though, he finds that he was not the cause of Manuel's death. Phew. He also learns that the person that was dead might not actually be Manuel, but might be his clone, after he's confronted by another version of Manuel and then a team of Manuel clones. Number 9, he really kills an enemy. I mean, it's easy to understand why Barry does this, especially given everything that we've talked about in regards to Eobard Thawne on part 1 of this list, and all the things that we have yet to mention about all of the awful stuff Zoom has done outside of that. Eobard Thawne is pretty awful, and he's definitely super evil. His whole life mission seems to be about messing up Barry Allen's life, so when Barry Allen finally used force against Zoom when he came to attack his fiancée, Fiona, and snapped his neck, it almost felt justified. But then again, killing people isn't heroic. It's not what we usually expect from our heroes, and it's not what we usually want them to do. After he killed Zoom, Barry was put on trial for the murder, and even his nephew, Wally West, testified against him, believing that his uncle could have done more to try and defeat Thawne without killing him. Barry is deemed guilty for the crime and is forced to leave the present and instead find a new home in a future timeline. And friends, if you are enjoying this list and you want, I don't know, maybe even more sad moments from us from comics, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Wallace West and Iris West versus Red Death. During the events of Dark Knight's Metal, we see Iris West and Wallace West attacked by the Red Death. She, Wallace, and everyone else in Central City have been infected by the Red Death's speed powers and find themselves rapidly aging, being turned into dry, brittle, corpse-like versions of their former selves. The moment is tragic, but fortunately, Barry arrives just in time and attempts to save the two of them. Iris confesses how much she misses him and how sorry she is for killing Eobard Thawne, because that's what happened in this continuity, but just as he grabs them and rushes to save them, the ground below opens up below him and swallows up Barry, and he finds himself confronted by the Batman Who Laughs. Oh no. It's a pretty sweet moment though with him and Iris. Sad and sweet, my favorite. Number 7, Godspeed's death. You wouldn't think the death of a villain would be tragic until you realize just how Godspeed was created and who was really responsible for that. Godspeed was a friend and colleague of Barry Allen's who ended up getting superpowers from basically a Speed Force storm. He was working to avenge the death of his brother, whose killer was never found, even before he received powers. Godspeed, however, not only used his powers to avenge the cold cases of other victims, but also ended up draining all the other newly created speedsters of their speed force, killing them. In the end, he and Barry and Eobard Thawne had to team up and travel back in time. After this, it seemed as though Godspeed might end up redeeming himself, but it was then revealed that Thawne had been the one to murder his brother. He killed Godspeed in front of Barry and did the thing that he always does, claimed that he had done it all just to torment Barry Allen. Wow. Number 6, Death of Iris West. Eobard Thawne, as you may have caught on at this point, really loves destroying Barry Allen's life. Like, a lot. And so it shouldn't come too much surprise that he'd eventually turn to Iris West for even more good old torment and fun. Eobard Thawne, aka Professor Zoom, was actually also in love with Iris West, and so this time around, it was less about tormenting Barry and more about winning Iris. Although I'm sure the torment was like icing on top of his twisted murder cake for Zoom. Iris refused to be with Zoom, and for that, he killed her, attempting to frame a known convict for it in the process. At least he did so painlessly though, I guess. He phased his hand into her head and then made it solid, and then she was just dead. He tried to make it painless, but still pretty terrible. Fortunately, Iris would return, of course, because time travel shenanigans would allow her to basically be resurrected in a new body that looked completely identical to her old one, but like in the future. How weird, but also nice. Number 5, Death of Henry Allen. As though Nora Allen's dying in CW's The Flash wasn't bad enough, we also see Henry Allen die in the show, and so too does Barry. He gets a front row seat, as a matter of fact, and once again, it also happens in his family home. Oh my goodness. In almost the exact same spot as Nora, feels like to me. Professor Zoom, of course, is the one responsible for this. Zoom, heartbreakingly, only kills Henry Allen after he has been released from prison and has reconnected with his son. The fact that his father's death echoes his mother's so much just makes it even more heartbreaking. It also causes Barry to unleash some internal fury, which we see when he pursues Zoom and potentially considers him killing him for what he's done. Of course, then another version of Zoom comes and kills him, and anyways, timey-wimey stuff. Number 4, Flashpoint. We talked about the Arrowverse version of this on part 1 of the list, but now it's time to dive into the comics version of this event. Flashpoint is set off by the fact that Barry Allen decided to do something kinda selfish and go back in time and save his mom. However, he then realizes just what he has done when he sees what happens to the rest of the world as a result of this change. Bruce Wayne ends up dead instead of his parents, making Thomas Wayne Batman and Martha Wayne the Joker in this new reality, and that's really just scratching the surface of how messed up the state of everything pretty much is in Flashpoint. Barry gets his powers restored so that he can fix all of this and everything that he messed up, and then of course is tearfully forced to say goodbye to his mother again! It's hard enough losing your mom once, but losing her twice when you know that she could in theory live and you'd saved her before must be impossibly sad. Like, geez, I feel so bad for Nora and Barry, it's so tragic. Number 3, Death of Nora West Allen. In the Arrowverse, Nora West Allen is the daughter of Barry Allen and Iris West. She ends up with her parents in the past. Later, she is forced to either give up her life or accept the negative speed force as becoming a permanent part of her, making her more like the rage-fueled Thawne. Nora acknowledges that all of this is happening as a result of her own mistakes and messing with the timeline, and of course, rather than give in to the dark side of the negative speed force, she chooses to simply let go. Despite the fact that her parents swear that they'll find a way to remove the negative speed force from her and really don't want her to let go. Nora knows, however, that this is impossible, and rather than let herself be corrupted by the negative speed force, she gives up her life. As Barry and Iris hug her in a tearful embrace, Nora West Allen fades away, allowing herself to be rewritten out of the timeline and wiped from existence. It's actually really sad. I feel like so many of these things in The Flash, when they happen, make me cry so much. Feel like sometimes I just need a good cry, I guess. Number 2, Iris West dies again! Yep, as if the love of his life dying once wasn't bad enough, even after Barry and Iris are reunited in the 30th century, Crisis on Infinite Earths comes a knockin', prepared to mess up everything for the happy couple, and well, just about everybody else besides. In the events leading up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, Barry found his new home threatened. He does his best to save his Earth and Iris, but this time around, he doesn't win the day like he usually does, and instead he fails. As if that wasn't bad enough, this also set him on a course racing towards his own death in what was yet to come. Number 1, Crisis on Infinite Earths. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Anti-Monitor threatened to destroy every Earth and basically all of reality and everything, and he ended up trapping Barry Allen, the Flash, so that he could not prevent the Anti-Monitor's dastardly plans. Just as Anti-Monitor was getting ready to destroy the last surviving Earths, Barry managed to escape. He uses his super speed to dismantle the Anti-Monitor's major weapon, his antimatter cannon, but in doing so, Barry finds himself devoured by the Speed Force and seemingly killed. How tragic. Though Barry would return, it wouldn't be for over 20 years, and everyone mourned his sacrifice and his passing. In the end, his sacrifice made it possible for the heroes to rally and defeat Anti-Monitor, saving the universe and providing us with a new continuity. 10. Barry can't go back to his timeline. While the comics have tons of tragic events when it comes to The Flash, so does the Arrowverse. Tragedy has followed Barry Allen's character there as well, and continues to haunt him constantly throughout the various seasons of The Flash. Flash. At one point, Barry creates a flashpoint when he successfully goes back in time and saves his mother Nora. This happens only after failing to do so a few times in the show. In season 3, he returns from that timeline, realizing he had to try and fix the divergent timeline that he'd created, but when he went back to fix it and then returned to the present, he realized that everything was still different from how it had originally been, and that he'd never be able to quite fix what he had done and revert the timeline back to how it was originally. In other words, he'd be stuck in a divergent timeline where everything was just a little bit different. This event not only affected the Flash, but also affected the entire Arrowverse. Number 9. The Flash lost his legs. But don't worry, only temporarily. Still, it was a pretty dark and tragic moment for Barry. This moment comes to us from issue 68 of the 2016 run of The Flash from Rebirth. Here, the villain known as the Trickster made it appear as though he had cut off Barry's legs, giving us a shocking cliffhanger ending for the final page of that issue. In issue 69, however, Barry manages to overcome what is revealed to be a momentary setback. His missing legs appear to be just a trick, and he is able to overcome his own pessimism to free himself from the trick and save the day in the end. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you love us as much as we love you, be sure to show that by clicking all the things. Hit subscribe, click the like, do the comment stuff, do everything. Thank you. Number 8. Final Crisis. The tragedy of this event in regards to both Flash's Wally West and Barry Allen failing their mission set us up for one very emotional moment between Barry and Iris. During Final Crisis, Barry Allen and Wally West attempted to save everyone from Darkseid by preventing the death of Orion, but they failed. As a result, the Earth was overtaken by the anti-life equation, with everyone becoming affected by it and turning into a sad, depressed husk of their former self. Barry ends up coming across Iris, who is lost to the anti-life equation. With us believing there is likely no hope for the couple, Barry goes to kiss Iris, trying desperately to free her. Their love, combined with the Speed Force charged touch of his lips, works and Iris is freed, only highlighting though how small the glimmer of hope is in a world overrun by the anti-life equation, and how much work is still ahead. Number 7. His father's confession. Barry Allen's father Henry was wrongfully convicted of murdering his mother Nora, and it was this claim by his father, who continued to profess his innocence from the day of the murder and years afterwards, that inspired Barry to get a job within the justice system, becoming a forensic scientist for the Central City Police Department. However, after years, Henry had all but given up on the belief that he would ever be set free, and so lied to his son, confessing that he had committed the crime, when still he really hadn't. This drove Barry into a frenzy, turning his entire world upside down, and caused him to destroy his lab, becoming covered in chemicals as lightning from the storm outside crashed through his window and electrocuted him, granting him super speed and allowing him to tap into the Speed Force. This accident may have come from a moment of intense tragedy, but it would also lift Barry Allen up, turning him into the hero we have come to know as the Flash. Number 6. Reverse Flash wins. One of the saddest and most terrifying realities, of course, comes to us from the Dark Multiverse. Here we are talking about the Tales of the Dark Multiverse Flashpoint story, where Barry Allen fails to get his powers back and instead ends up frying. This allows Eobard Thawne to win the day, and so Reverse Flash ends up replacing Barry Allen as the Flash. Barry's attempt here to regain his powers instead created something new, a darker timeline, a divergence, a dark flashpoint. This version of the Flash, Thawne's version, uses his power to defeat all the heroes in the current timeline he arrives in, manipulate the President of the United States into being his puppet, and tortures the Batman of that timeline, Thomas Wayne, with the knowledge that he, Thawne, could fix the world and put it back to normal if he wanted to, but that he doesn't want to do that. He confesses that he enjoys keeping Thomas around because Batman was aware of the way things should be, but knew how hopeless fixing everything was now that Barry was dead. Of course, in the end, he does kind of fix it for Thomas, because he's like, I'm gonna save his family just to see what'll happen, but it's not in a good way. It's not helping him in a good way, I don't think. Number 5. Everyone Forgets Wally. This was a series of tragic moments that also ended up leading to one of the most emotionally charged moments in comic book history. After the events of Flashpoint, Wally West became trapped outside the timeline, only able to peer into it through the Speed Force. Stuck in the Speed Force, Wally ventured around Earth looking for anyone who might recognize him, but no one had any memories of the Speedster, and so, alas, no one did recognize him. In the end, Wally found Barry and said his final goodbye to the seemingly confused hero hero, preparing himself to disappear permanently from existence. But then suddenly, Barry remembered Wally and was able to pull him back into the timeline and into existence. Not only did this moment make us all cry tears of joy at the two reconnecting, but the whole journey up to this moment was particularly sad and tragic, just tears all around. Number 4. Death of Bart Allen. Bart Allen was the time-displaced grandson of Barry Allen, who started off in the comics as Impulse before becoming the Flash sidekick Kid Flash, until he eventually took over for Wally West as the Flash. Bart died without even having superpowers, sacrificing himself to save others, as Flashes so often do. After becoming depowered, Bart pretended to still have his super speed in order to distract a group of villains known as the Rogues, long enough for his girlfriend to disarm the device that had depowered him and also threatened to blow up all of Los Angeles. Unfortunately, without the Speed Force, he was no match for them and ended up being brutally killed in the fight. His death happened in the pages of The Flash, The Fastest Man Alive in issue 13, and a funeral followed in issue 43 of Countdown. Fortunately, Bart would return to life during the events of Final Crisis. Cause you know, it's still comic books. Number 3. Death of Nora Allen. In the CW Arrowverse, we got to see Barry Allen experience his mother's death firsthand. He attempted to go back to the moment that she died during season 1 in an attempt to try and save her, but was prevented from doing so by his future self, who warned him that he basically couldn't get involved. Arriving in time but unable to do anything, he had to watch again as his mother was attacked and killed. As she lay dying, he approached her and revealed himself to be the Flash and her adult son, Barry Allen, attempting to comfort her, at least in her last few moments, by letting her know that in the future her son would grow up to be okay and her husband was also doing fine. Nora and Barry both smiled tearfully as they said their final goodbyes. This scene always makes me sad. It always makes me cry. Number 2. Heroes in Crisis. Wally was being treated at Sanctuary with other superheroes and some redeemed villains turned hero when he snapped. The strain of the new continuity which he was aware of, making him feel terribly alone, and the combination of taking a peek at the records belonging to other supers who had come through there got to him and caused him to lose control of his powers. The murder mystery story would later reveal that it was actually Wally West who was responsible for the Sanctuary massacre, and that Wally had attempted to cover up what he had done to help him buy some time to fix it. This event turned Wally into a bona fide villain in the comics, who later would have to pay for his crimes, even though they were accidental. I mean, he didn't mean to do it. Not only was this sad for Wally in the comics, but it was also a sad moment for Wally West fans everywhere. Because this was not the Wally West we wanted. We were like, we didn't ask for this, Wally West. Can we get a refund? Where's Happy Wally? Number 1. New 52. One of the saddest things to have happened to Wally West, in my opinion, was the DC reset that wiped out his family. Because Wally had been pulled out of the continuity by Dr. Manhattan and then inserted back into it, he still had the memories of his New Earth life prior to New 52. He remembered his marital bliss, his children, his happy family, but now they were all remarkably missing. The love of his life, Linda Park, didn't remember who he was, and they didn't have a relationship here. Linda had her own thing kinda going on. His children were just nowhere to be found, and this actually set him down a path of trying to figure out what had happened to them. Eventually he would find his children again and save them, but Linda would prove more of a moral conundrum for him, especially as he realized that with his touch he could give people back their memories from the prior continuity. And it was actually this position of remembering everything that made Wally basically go insane and kind of prompted the events of Heroes in Crisis. While that was tragic, I think living in a displaced continuity where you feel completely out of place is even more sad.